The train tracks hummed beneath the weight of the waiting steam engine, its iron heart pulsing with the slow rhythm of goodbye, and as the golden sun bled across the frontier sky, casting long shadows on the dusty platform, time seemed to... Still around them, the woman in her faded brown pioneer dress, bonnet tied beneath her chin like a sacred ritual, standing with her hands clenched at her sides, and the man in his long coat and broad-rimmed hat, eyes dark and unreadable, except for the unspoken sorrow flickering like wildfire beneath the calm. Their faces bore matching scars, not just stitched across their skin but etched deep into their souls, remnants of a life carved from hardship, war, and choices that left wounds no doctor could treat. Her scar ran from cheek to jaw, clean and careful, earned the day she'd shielded a child from gunfire in a mining camp raid, while his ran deeper, jagged across his face like the land he'd once fought to tame, both bearing marks of battles fought far from each other but always somehow tied, as though fate had carved the same story into them both long before their paths had ever crossed. He raised his hand slowly now, as if afraid time might shatter if he moved too quickly, and touched her face where the scar began, his calloused thumb brushing her skin with reverence, like she was some sacred relic of the life he never thought he deserved, a memory of the nights under prairie stars, whispering promises they knew the West could never let them keep, of stolen moments in shadowed barns, of laughter muffled beneath quilts stitched by mothers they no longer had, of mornings where they forgot for a fleeting breath that the world beyond the Feyhoundian horizon was filled with men who'd hunt them for the bounties on their heads or the sins in their pasts. Her eyes closed under his touch, not from fear or shame but from the ache of knowing that love like this could only live in moments like these, brief, burning, destined to end with a whistle and smoke, and yet she didn't move, didn't speak, didn't beg him to stay, because they had said everything in the silence of nights spent waiting for gunshots that never came and dreams of a small cabin on a hill that would never be built. And now, with the train groaning behind them like a beast waking from slumber, he let his hand fall, not because he didn't want to hold her, but because if he didn't, he never would be able to walk away. And he had to board that train, had to vanish into the mountains where men like him still had a chance. To outrun their names, had to give her the quiet life she deserved, even if it meant breaking the only heart that had ever beaten in rhythm with his. She opened her eyes then, and he saw it, the fire, the fury, the forgiveness, all in one look. And she didn't need to speak, because he heard her say, "Go," and it wasn't surrender. It was grace, the kind only the strongest women could offer. When they knew goodbye was the greatest gift they could give, and so he nodded once, hat tipping forward to hide the tears burning behind his eyes, turned from her with the slow agony of a man leaving half his soul behind. And with boots heavy as lead, he walked toward the train, each step echoing like a gunshot in his chest, while behind him she stood still as a statue carved by heartbreak and hope, watching him until the steam swallowed his figure and the whistle screamed across the plains like the cry of all the love stories that had ever ended too soon. And when the train finally groaned to life, chugging forward with the fury of iron and fire, she didn't chase it, didn't collapse, didn't weep, not yet, for she had known from the first time she saw him ride into town, blood on his shirt, and sorrow in his eyes, that this was how it would end, with fire behind him and silence between them. And though the platform emptied and the dust began to settle, she remained where he'd left her, hands still tingling where his fingers had lingered, scar burning like a brand, and heart beating not in despair but in defiance. Because even though she had lost him to the world's hunger, to the endless frontier that devoured men like him whole, she knew he carried her with him like a promise stitched under his skin. And wherever he rode, through snow or canyon, through lawless towns or holy lands, he would feel her breath in the wind, her voice in the crackling fire, her love in every scar he bore, and long after the world forgot their names, long after the tracks rusted and the train stopped. Coming, the memory of that single touch, that single goodbye, would live on in the dust and smoke of the West. Like a legend told in hushed tones around firelight by cowboys who still believed in the kind of love that hurt, the kind that stayed, the kind that said goodbye only to survive. Asterisk. The years passed, slow and brutal as the winters in the northern territories, and yet not a single morning slipped by that he didn't feel her presence stitched into the fabric of his days. He rode through blizzards that swallowed whole towns, through red canyons echoing with ghost winds, through outlaw camps and forgotten gold trails, but her voice followed him like a hymn, soft as a prayer, fierce as a promise. Some nights, when the fire cracked just right, he swore he could still feel the warmth of her hand on his chest, the weight of her goodbye lingering on his cheek like smoke that never faded. He didn't chase love again. He didn't speak of her to anyone. She was not a memory to be shared. She was a part of him, like his blood, like the scar on his face that ached in the cold. Asterisk. He built a quiet life in the high mountains, carving a cabin out of silence and pine, trapping just enough to live, fighting just enough to survive. He sent money back to the town, sometimes anonymous, envelopes tucked with cash and no return address. He never knew if she received them, but it was all he could give her now. Safety, distance, a life untouched by his shadow. Asterisk. And yet, the wind would betray him. Every spring it would carry the scent of wildflowers and wood smoke, and he'd remember her hair falling down in the dark, the way she laughed once in a barn when the world still felt young. And each time he saddled his horse and looked west, toward the old rail town, a battle raged in him, one part begging to see her again, just once, the other part terrified that she'd moved on. Married some clean-shaven merchant with soft hands and steady days. Asterisk. But fate, stubborn as the dust in his boots, had other plans. Asterisk. It was a letter that found him first, tied to a whiskey bottle left on the stoop of his cabin one fog-thick morning. No name. Just 7 words, scrawled in trembling handwriting that punched a hole through his ribs. Asterisk. The scar still burns. I remember you. Asterisk. He read it 10 times before the bottle slipped from his hand and shattered on the ground. Her handwriting. Older maybe, but it was hers. The way she curled the R, the pause before the last word. It was her. Asterisk. The next day, he didn't pack food or maps or even a change of clothes. He just saddled his oldest horse, lit a cigar, and rode down the trail like a man chasing a ghost. Asterisk. By the time he reached the town again, it had changed. The platform was quiet, the station faded, the dust more settled now. A few familiar buildings stood, some rotting, others clinging to life, but the people were different. New faces, new stares. But he didn't care about any of them. Asterisk. He cared only about the woman sitting alone on the bench beneath the water tower, wearing a dress not unlike the one she wore that day so many years ago, brown, simple, practical. Her bonnet was gone. Her hair had streaks of silver now. But when she looked up, the world folded in on itself. The scar on her cheek was still there, and so was the fire in her eyes. Asterisk. He stopped a few feet from her. His voice cracked like dried timber. Asterisk. Didn't think you'd still be here. Asterisk. She looked at him for a long time before replying, her voice soft but steady. Didn't think you'd wait this long. Asterisk. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain all the years of silence, the letters he never sent, the dreams he tried to kill, but none of that mattered now. She stood slowly and walked to him. Her hand reached up, just as his had all those years ago, and touched the scar on his face. I never married, she said. He blinked. Swallowed hard. Why not? Asterisk. Because I knew I'd only compare every man to the one who walked away to save me. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for a decade. I tried, he whispered. Tried to forget. Tried to protect you by staying gone. Asterisk, she smiled, bittersweet and sure. You didn't protect me. You haunted me. Asterisk. They stood like that for what felt like 100 lifetimes, the wind tugging at their clothes, the silence full of everything. They never said. Then, finally, she asked, Are you back for good? Asterisk, he didn't answer. Not with words. Asterisk, he just dropped his hat, stepped forward, and kissed her gently, like he was learning her all over again, like time had bowed in reverence to the love. It had failed to kill, and around them, the town kept breathing, unaware that two ghosts had finally come home.